Remember that place where you always got a thick slice of deep pan pizza after school? Or those roadside diners where you stopped on family holidays for beans, chips, and a lukewarm cuppa? In this video, I'll show you 10 iconic British fast food chains that have disappeared, and what their disappearance tells us about how our food, our cities, and our lives have changed. So, if you ever miss the taste of a bender in a bun, or those oddly comforting red leather booths, hit like, subscribe, and let's take a stroll down memory lane. Right then, let's start with a pizza place many of us still miss. There was a time in Britain when going out for a pizza felt like a treat straight out of a travel brochure. And at the heart of that era was Pizzaland, one of the earliest chains to bring the Italian classic to the high street. Founded in 1970, Pizzaland served up thin crusts, bubbling mozzarella, and tomato sauce that, while not exactly Neapolitan, certainly did the trick for British taste buds of the time. It had a really nice decor that felt like it was a real family restaurant. Pizzaland offered some great pizza, garlic bread, and a bottomless carafe of cola, which was great whether you were going for a birthday dinner, a first date, or a casual night out. At its peak, there were more than 140 locations across the UK, but around the 90s, it began to go out of style. Bigger American-style chains, changing property prices and shifting consumer habits eventually pushed Pizzaland out of the spotlight, and by 1996, most of its branches had been absorbed by rivals like Pizza Hut or had been closed entirely. If you grew up in the late 1980s or early 90s, chances are Deep Pan Pizza Co. was your go-to for a hearty, cheesy feast. With its iconic all-you-can-eat buffet format and generous slices thicker than your school textbooks, Deep Pan Pizza wasn't just a restaurant. It was a British institution for birthday parties, family dinners, and messy, glorious teenage hangouts. Its unique selling point was that it sold deep pan pizza, which was incredibly filling. The restaurants themselves were warm and welcoming, and were often found in town centers or tucked inside shopping precincts. They had a vibe that was a little less polished than Pizza Hut, but felt more accessible, which made it perfect for the hard-working class. In the mid-1990s, changing dining trends began to favor thinner crusts, fancier toppings, and more artisanal styles, which really did a number on Deep Pan's old-school formula. By 1998, the chain disappeared almost overnight. Its parent company focused instead on newer concepts, and the last few Deep Pans quietly folded. Today, the phrase Deep Pan might just remind you of a supermarket frozen pizza, but for many of us, it recalls a time when pizza was something you really had to sit down for, preferably with a napkin tucked into your collar. Long before motorway service stations were filled with Starbucks and Pret, there was Happy Eater, the cheerful roadside diner that lit up countless British road trips in the 1970s and 80s. With its bright red signs and smiling cartoon face, it was a beacon for families looking to stretch their legs and grab a warm meal. Happy Eater wasn't about fast food in the American sense. It was about comfort, sausage and chips, beans on toast, a pot of tea, and a jam sponge for dessert. The kind of food your mum might make on a weekday evening, served in warm booths with plastic trays and paper menus. Kids loved it, and it wasn't just because of the food. The outdoor play area had climbing frames that kids really loved, and you might have been one of those kids too. But in the 1990s, competition intensified. Trust House Fort, which owned both Happy Eater and Little Chef, began consolidating the brands. By the mid-90s, Happy Eater was phased out entirely, its logos replaced, and its distinct identity erased. Still, the name brings a smile, a happy one even, to those who remember. Speaking of Happy Eater, of all the names on this list, Little Chef may be the most legendary. Founded in 1958, it was more than just a restaurant chain. It was a British institution. For decades, its chubby, red-cheeked mascot greeted travelers on dual carriageways and motorways, promising a hot breakfast and a clean loo. By the 1970s and 80s, stopping at a Little Chef was part of the journey itself. Families would pile out of the car after hours on the road, drawn by the smell of frying bacon and the promise of the Olympic breakfast, a mountain of eggs, beans, toast, mushrooms, hash browns, and sausages. Kids sipped orange squash, while parents enjoyed tepid coffee and a moment of peace. But as time went on, the world sped up. Fast food chains were bringing in much quicker service and modern menus. Little tried to keep up by launching roadside partnerships, changing logos, even updating its menus, but it just wasn't enough. By 2018, after 60 years on the road, the final branch, sadly, closed its doors. If you were a teenager or 20-something in the 1980s or early 90s, Fatty Arbuckle's was the place to go when you were hungry and wanted to feel like you were in a real American diner, even if you'd never stepped foot outside the UK. Inspired by the silent film star Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, this chain served up towering burgers, curly fries and milkshakes that came in glasses as big as your head. Launched in 1983 in Plymouth, it quickly expanded across the country, promising an all-American eating experience with jukeboxes, neon signs, and super large serving sizes. Families went for birthday parties, couples on casual dates, and groups of teens looking to split a plate of nachos and feel grown up. But by the late 1990s, Fatty Arbuckle's found itself falling out of favor. Changing health trends made the fatty in its name seem less charming and more off-putting. The chain rebranded simply as Arbuckle's, but the magic never quite returned. By the early 2000s, the restaurants had closed or been sold off, disappearing almost as quickly as they'd arrived. Still, for many, it was the first place you tried onion rings or shared a thick strawberry shake with friends, a memory drenched in ketchup and laughter. Before jacket potatoes became something trendy served with sour cream and avocado, Spudulike made them a hearty, affordable meal for everyone, baked to fluffy perfection, split open, and piled high with fillings like cheese and beans, tuna mayo, or even coleslaw. For many of us growing up in the 1970s or 1980s, Spudulike was a shopping trip essential. Founded in 1974, it grew rapidly throughout the UK, especially in shopping centres and high streets. The food was wholesome and the experience was casual. Sitting down with a foil-wrapped potato and plastic fork after a long afternoon of errands felt like a small reward. But as fast casual dining changed, Spudulike began to feel dated. New chains offering gourmet takes on casual dining started to dominate mall food courts. Spudulike went into administration in 2019, with most locations shuttered shortly after. Still, the name evokes simpler times, and perhaps your first realization that yes, a potato really could be a meal. For many visitors to London, and indeed for many Brits on a trip to the capital, a meal at Garfunkel's was a rite of passage. Starting in the 1970s, Garfunkel's offered that curious blend of vaguely American, broadly European, and comfortingly British food that made it appealing to practically anyone. The menus were packed: rotisserie chicken, burgers, lasagna, steak and kidney pie, and even prawn cocktails, all under one roof. It wasn't posh, and it wasn't fast food either. It was a place where you could sit down after a matinee in the West End or before catching a train out of town. Garfunkel's felt dependable, the sort of place your parents might take you for your birthday or where school trips would end with a celebration meal. For decades, it held on in prime tourist spots like Trafalgar Square and Oxford Street. But As chain restaurants modernized and independent bistros flourished, Garfunkel's began to lose its identity. By 2020, after decades of service, the last restaurants quietly closed their doors. It felt like there used to be a Benjys in the heart of every bustling UK city back in the 1990s. It was a great takeaway sandwich shop with some pretty reasonable prices back then. Benjys was known for its quick service, humble presentation, and unbeatable value. Founded in 1989, Benjys rode the wave of convenience culture. With sandwiches, jacket potatoes, hot soups and snacks always ready behind the counter, it became a fixture of urban life. You might remember their meal deals like a sandwich, a drink, and a snack for under £2. Or you might remember the way the shop always smelled like toasties and baked beans. What set Benjys apart was its unpretentiousness. There were no artisan baguettes or sourdough experiments, just hearty fillings and bread that got the job done. For many, it was the first taste of city working life, lunch in hand, back to the desk before the phone rang. But by the mid-2000s, changing tastes and rising competition from chains like Pret-a-Manger and Eat left Benjys behind. The chain collapsed into administration around 2006, and most outlets vanished by 2007. Still, for a generation, Benjys wasn't just a sandwich shop. It was lunch, 5 days a week, wrapped in cling film and nostalgia. Back when train stations still had that charming grit and a real sense of occasion, there was one burger spot many of us remember fondly: Casey Jones Burgers. Tucked inside British rail stations across the UK during the 1980s, Casey Jones was part of the travel experience for a generation. Long before platform cafes were taken over by Pret or Burger King, this was where you went for a hot meal and a break from the clatter of the rails. Run by Travellers Fare, the catering arm of British Rail, Casey Jones offered classic fast food fare like burgers, fries, milkshakes, and the occasional hot dog. Kids loved the railway theme, and adults appreciated the reliability: a hot burger before catching a late-night train or during a long connection. Its name was inspired by the American railroad folk hero Casey Jones, and the branding captured that sense of adventure and movement. But as the 1990s rolled in, British Rail began modernizing and franchising. Slowly, Casey Jones restaurants were replaced by larger global brands, and the last of them disappeared without much fanfare. The last chain we have is the legendary Berni Inn. Although it's not a typical fast food chain, it was extremely popular, especially around the 60s and 70s. Berni Inns opened up in the 1950s and brought restaurant dining to working-class families. For them, a meal at the Berni was usually a special event, like a wedding anniversary, a birthday, or a rare evening out. The atmosphere was dark and wood-paneled, the staff wore waistcoats, and the menus rarely changed. And that's what made it comforting. You knew exactly what to expect, and it always delivered. What made Berni Inn so iconic was how consistent it was. It always had the same dishes, the same layout, and the same slightly overcooked steak which everyone came to love. But by the 1990s, tastes had shifted and pub chains began modernizing. Berni Inns were slowly phased out, and many of them turned into beef eaters or other pub-style restaurants. Still, the name evokes a powerful sense of nostalgia, a time when dining out felt like stepping into another world, even if it was just down the road. And that's it for today's trip down memory lane. Give it a like if it brought back the flavor of the past, and don't forget to subscribe for more delicious nostalgia. See you next time.